Good morning. My name is Jennifer March, and I'm the Executive Director of Citizens Committee for Children, and I'm so glad that you are joining us today as we kickstart a week-long series of meetings with elected officials in the Senate, Assembly, and the Governor's Office to try to inform the state's fiscal 2023 adopted budget. As many of you know, Citizens Committee for Children is a child advocacy organization based in New York City, and we do statewide advocacy to ensure that all children are healthy, housed, educated, and safe. And this morning, I'm so pleased to not only be joined by members of the CCC team, but also several incredible child advocates themselves to speak about issues confronting children and families across the state of New York, as well as here in New York City. By way of background, CCC has been paying an enormous amount of attention, as have all of you, to the pandemic's impact on children and families here in New York City. And we know from our data analysis that illness, loss of life, loss of income, increased housing insecurity, school disruption, and increased behavioral health needs have all disproportionately impacted children and families of color and communities of color. And with the state budget, we have a real opportunity to ensure that we invest in services, programs, and infrastructure at the community level that ensure we have an equitable recovery and that all children thrive. So I'm happy today that we are, as I said, going to be joined by Rebecca Charles, Caitlin Pasaretti, and Alice Bufkin on my team. And each of them will go on to introduce child advocates that will speak to specific issues of our policy platform. I would just close my introduction by saying, sorry, I'm a little distracted because someone is texting me. I apologize. I'm also excited to say that we've been joined by Assemblymember Linda Rosenthal, who's the chair of the Committee on Social Services, an incredible champion for children and families. And as we get started, I'm going to turn it over to her first. Assemblymember, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me and for holding this today and for all of your longstanding marvelous work. Assemblymember Linda Rosenthal. I represent the Upper West Side, parts of Hell's Kitchen in Manhattan. And as you said, I'm the chair of the Committee on Social Services. And, I'm happy to be joining you, not just here virtually, but throughout the time.
I'm so sorry. Jennifer and Assemblymember, there was a hiccup with the live stream. We're just going to press play right now. Can you take it from the top, Assemblymember? I'm so sorry.
Okay.
Carlos, let us know when you're ready.
Okay. No, yeah, sorry. We have to take it to the top entirely. So Jen will need to restart.
All right. I'm so sorry, you guys.
Sorry, everyone.
We're only 3 minutes late. Jen, we're going to go back to you.
All right, Linda, just sit tight. Thank you.
All right, Laura, can you spotlight Jen? Okay.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Jennifer March, the Executive Director of Citizens Committee for Children, and I'm so pleased that you are here with us today to kickstart a week of meetings with the Senate, Assembly, and the Governor's Office to try to inform the state's 2023 adopted budget. As many of you know, Citizens Committee for Children is a child advocacy organization based in New York City, and we do statewide advocacy focused on informing budgets and legislation that would ensure all children are healthy, housed, educated, and safe. Like many of you, we've been paying close attention to the pandemic's impact on children and families here in New York City. And we know from Census Pulse survey data that when you look at illness, loss of life, loss of income and employment, increased housing insecurity, school disruption in access to primary health care, developmental supports, and skyrocketing behavioral health needs, our children and families are really suffering, and these negative impacts are disproportionately impacting children and families of color and communities of color. We believe that budgets are statements of values. And in this budget that Governor Hochul has put out, It is squarely focused on recovery, and there are many things in the budget that we support and endorse. But we will use this week to engage in conversation with state legislators to ensure that the budget goes farther and ensures an equitable recovery for all children. So I'm joined today by not only the team at CCC that covers policy advocacy across a whole host of areas, but also child advocates that will speak to specific areas of our platform. And it's my privilege right now to introduce Assemblymember Linda Rosenthal, Chair of the Committee on Social Services, a longtime partner of CCC.
Thank you, Jennifer, so much. I'm delighted to be here with all of you today, virtually, but also working together over the years. I represent the 67th Assembly District in Manhattan, which includes the Upper West Side and parts of Hell's Kitchen. And as you said, I'm chair of the Committee on Social Services, where some of these important issues land. First, thank you to the CCC for all of your advocacy over so many decades. I am sure that things would not be the way they are in this state in terms of funding and attention and challenges we've overcome together were it not for all of you. And so I thank you on behalf of the state's families and children, of course. Now, we know that throughout the past 2 years, children have been so gravely affected by the pandemic. And so many have found it difficult to adjust, as have we all, but children don't have the skills to navigate all of these troubles. And kids from low-income families or kids from communities who are from communities of color have had to scramble to pay the rent and utilities each month, and the growing homeless population of families with children is just heartbreaking and unacceptable. But we know that because of a combination of federal aid in the billions and better than expected tax revenues, and just we heard the governor say we've earned $2 billion through sports betting, which I might not agree with, but look, it's $2 billion. We have a surplus. And if we want to ensure that there's an equitable recovery from this pandemic, we need to spend this new money wisely. So, I was pleased to see that there's a 5.4% COLA in the executive budget proposal for human services workers, but this COLA does not include all human services workers. And the sector is predominantly women, people of color, immigrants, and many of whom are also parents and caretakers. So we have to make sure that they are included in the COLA, and our final budget must take care of all of them and make sure that we can keep a dedicated set of workers in our human services field. We know that many parents could not go to work if they didn't have helpers. Elderly, disabled people couldn't survive on their own were it not for the healthcare workers and the home care workers. And many of them have families they themselves have to take care of. Of course, we know that there needs to be money for the Children's and Families Reinvestment Act, which is, a major ask and an important and vital thing that we need to fund. It synopsizes everything that we need to do around helping children and families right now. Also, we see a lot of New Yorkers starting to be getting eviction notices. In my district, I've already gotten close to 10 evictions because the ERAP funding is over. I mean, the governor's asked for more money, billions, but we haven't gotten it yet. So what we need to do is to pass the Housing Access Voucher Program, create a statewide rental subsidy for low-income New Yorkers facing eviction, currently experiencing homelessness or at risk of losing their housing. And we know that so many families across the state are living on the precipice of eviction and not being able to manage all of their expenses. And more than 20% of all tenants pay more than half of their income on rent. And then what happens when you have to pay the rent? Well, you can't buy the clothes for the kids. You can't buy enough food. You can't pay for medication. In this state, it's just unconscionable that people have to make these choices. And so one major way of lifting families out of poverty is to increase our public assistance levels. Right now, I was reviewing some numbers. Nobody can subsist on the low level of aid that we give to families. And I have some bills to increase our public assistance levels, some of which haven't gone up since the 80s. That's more than 40 years. We have to lift families out of poverty, and that is one way to get them on the road so they can go do their jobs and not have to break themselves into 20 pieces to try to put a stop in all the holes. And, we provided families with these grants for a reason, but it's just shameful, actually. We can't proudly say as a state that we take care of children and families when we expect them to subsist on such low levels of assistance. So I'm working with a broad coalition of advocates on a package of legislation to increase these grants, and I look forward to working with CCC and all of you to get those through and become a reality so we can hold our heads up and say, yes, we don't just talk the talk, we actually get things done. At a time of prosperity, there's no excuse not to. And I say prosperity for the few, but we have the money right now. One other important area is Runaway and Homeless Youth Program that I've been fighting to fund in a meaningful way for years. We had an increase in 2016, but flat funding since. And I'm sure all of you have encountered runaway and homeless youth who are largely LGBTQ, who are kicked out of their houses, come to New York to find not just salvation, acceptance, a place to belong. And they are often re-victimized here in the big city, and we have to take care of them too. And I know there are many other issues that we work together on and that you, CCC, excel and lead on. And so I'm proud to be in coalition with you and all of your partners. And just thank you for the hard work that you do. And this week, you'll be educating everybody who doesn't know already what you do and where we need to focus. And so I thank you for all of that.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Assemblywoman Rosenthal, for joining us and for offering those wonderful words of inspiration. Due to the expiration of New York's eviction moratorium and a lack of funding for rental assistance, a statewide eviction crisis is imminent. The situation will be especially dire for children and families, as Assemblywoman Rosenthal just touched on. Children and families make up the highest population of those who are homeless or living in shelters. This budget season, CCC is demanding that our state leaders prioritize family homelessness in the budget by funding the Emergency Rental Assistance Program with the $2 billion in unallocated funds in the state budget, and enacting and funding the Housing Access Voucher Program to create New York's first ever statewide rental subsidy program. The Emergency Rental Assistance Program is a federally funded pandemic relief program that aims to avert evictions. Since its implementation, it's provided close to $2 billion in rental assistance and has received over 300,000 applicants. However, the program has faced a funding lapse since November. The portals have since been reopened, but ERAP now has to be properly funded to ensure the financial security that families need to remain in their homes. Currently, there is $2 billion in unallocated funds within the state budget. That money must be used for pandemic relief. Since ERAP is a pandemic relief program and $2 billion in rental assistance is enough to avert this crisis, Governor Hochul must allocate this money to ERAP. While the funding of ERAP is crucial in this moment, it only offers a one-time emergency fund and does not preclude the need for a permanent statewide rental subsidy, such as the Housing Access Voucher Program. The Housing Access Voucher Program would act similarly to Section 8, requiring recipients to pay 30% of their income toward rent. It would provide critical assistance to families unable to enroll in Section 8 due to capacity issues or immigration status. Rental assistance and housing stability must be prioritized in this year's budget. And if you want to help us, you can take action on our page on this, on the live stream page. You can take action and call on your state leaders to enact the Housing Access Voucher Program and to fund ERAP. I want to now introduce Khadijah Davis, a fellow of our Family Homelessness Coalition, who will be speaking about why these housing proposals are so important to her and her family.
Hi, my name is Khadijah. I was formerly homeless. I live in New York City. And before I actually went homeless, I was looking all over for certain programs. At the time, I had applied for Section 8 years ago, never got in. And at the time, other programs around New York City, it wasn't working for me because I wasn't in the shelter or different things like that. Being in the shelter is not the best place to be. A lot of people think is this, you go in there 1 minute, you come out the next minute. That's not how it is. Initially, when I applied to go to the shelter, 8 months pregnant, I got denied several times. I almost had to sleep on the trains at night, but somebody let me in their home for just for a small amount of time. I was able to get help that way. But when I officially went to the shelter a year later, it took me some time to get in. And when I got into the shelter, I thought, people told me, you'll get housing fast. That wasn't the truth. I got into the shelter and it was a struggle to get help and certain things for housing for myself because I didn't qualify for so many different things. And it's like, you have a job, yes. Do you have this? They put you in such a small box of things you have to fit into. And if you don't fit into that box, you're just almost basically cast aside and like, oh, well, you're not gonna get it. And the job I was working was part-time. So it wasn't enough for me to get a proper place for me and my daughter to go. Right now I live in NYCHA in Brooklyn, but it's honestly not the best neighborhood. I would like that the money gets funded to the people of New York City. And because we need the help. Honestly, everybody needs the help to just get better housing, better areas. We are honestly suffering and people sometimes are suffering in silence and they just need just a way out. Everybody wants to come in a nice home at night to sleep and just be rested and not be in a neighborhood was going to be full with violence and things like that. We just really need the help. Being homeless is just not the way to go. Being in a neighborhood was not created with so much violence and stuff like that. It's just not the way to go either. For myself, I don't think it's safe for your kids. And honestly, most times the school district that your child end up in is not the best either. If we had a program like this, it could save so many families. It could save so many immigrants. It could save so many people to have a better life. And when people have better lives, they are happier. They're not depressed as much because that's one thing out their mind. I have somewhere to sleep. I have somewhere to call home. Everybody wants a place to call home. I can't think of one person that I know who would say, no, I don't want a home. I want to sleep on the street. I want to not sleep on a couch at night. No, everybody wants a nice place to stay, a nice bed to sleep on, and to just be happy with themselves or just their families. So I think this funding will just be an excellent way to help out the people who definitely need it. If you're a person who's low income, this program could help you so much for you and your family. It can go a long way and it can make a huge difference in a lot of people's lives. Please hear the voices of the people like myself, people who look like me, people who don't look like me, because a lot of people just need help, especially in this time that we're in. People before probably didn't realize probably I wouldn't need help, but the pandemic came and it changed so many people's lives. And I think this program would be excellent to help make people's lives better. Thank you. And I hope you help us.
Thank you so much, Khadijah, for sharing. Thank you for sharing your story and also just showing how safety, education, housing, and healthy are all intersected. And that's why we focus on what we focus on together. My name is Pasaretti. I'm the Policy and Advocacy Associate at CCC. I focus on child welfare and youth justice. And this budget season, we're demanding a focus to strengthen families and communities. Investing in primary prevention is key to supporting our communities that are hurting from the continued impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. We are specifically supporting Assemblymember Andrew Hevesey's and Senator Jabari Brisport's Child and Family Reinvestment Act because it recognizes that primary prevention strengthens communities and provides strong social networks and resources for families. This act specifically calls for universal childcare and primary prevention investments, in addition to restoring and securing full funding for the state and local 65-35 match for protection, prevention, and independent living services, which, if matched, would increase about $30 million into our child welfare system. We want to fund the kinship guardianship assistance program outside of the foster care block grant, mirroring the structure of adoption subsidies in order to prioritize and incentivize counties to use kin as permanent placement options. We also need to increase the child welfare housing subsidy, which has been at $300 since 1988. Therefore, we're asking for the governor and the legislature to pass Assembly Bill 1777, which would increase the housing subsidy to $725 and promote family reunification and independent living. And finally, the Child and Families Reinvestment Act also calls for creating the Child and Family Wellbeing Fund, which supports the growth of primary prevention programs focused on the needs of families. So again, just want to thank Assemblymember Hevesy for really championing these causes. In transitioning to looking at youth justice, we have to invest in youth and youth opportunities. We cannot criminalize our way to safety or any form of systemic care. Instead, we need to move tangible resources to youth and communities. Specifically, we want to invest even more money in the Summer Youth Employment Program and oppose the millions in cuts to youth programs, labor programs, and other initiatives that is currently outlined in the budget. Removing support from communities at this time or ever is not the answer. While we were encouraged and we support the sustained funding for Raise the Age, we want to ensure that all counties are using the allocation to support youth impacted by the reform, and furthermore, to ensure that New York City can be eligible for this financial support as well. We are also asking to establish a mechanism through which to reinvest savings associated with the closure of state youth placement facilities into community services that promote healthy youth development, community safety, such as primary prevention, behavioral health, youth employment, and art and culture programs. We do not want to fund criminalizing structures. And finally, we want to pass Bill A3536A to strengthen existing protections under the Youthful Offender Law to ensure that young people up to the age of 26 can have access to employment and education and other resources to support their growth. I am honored to invite Assembly Hevesy to speak next. Thank you so much for joining us, Assembly Member. It's great to see you again.
Yeah, Caitlin, great to see you. Thanks for all that information. Can everybody hear me? Can I get a thumbs up? Okay, good, because I talk to myself a lot these days. So thank you, everybody. Jennifer March and CCC, you guys are great. You're the best 14 participants anywhere. I don't care what anybody says. So I want you to make sure that you understand that so first, thank you to Linda Rosenthal and her staff, who I understand were here and spoke earlier. That's really great. I will tell you that my colleagues and I are, this is just a crazy day. So I'm interacting with a bunch of them, but they're running all over the place. But I want to report to you that for the Children and Families Reinvestment Act that you were just talking about, Caitlin, and I really appreciate that. We are in a very good position with the number of members supporting, even though they have not been able to break away to come and spend time with us here today. And I think that there will be a comparable push in the Senate, which puts us exactly where we need to be to go aggressively after all of the asks this year, because this has to be the year for us, because the system has been so defunded and attacked and hurt for the last 12 years. That's after underfunding for decades. So this is our year. There's money, we have partners, and I think we're in good shape, at least in the Assembly going forward. So I'm happy to take any questions or happy to speak more, but I really thank you for all your work. I will also tell you that part of the reason why we got a good amount of colleagues signed on and continue to is the report, that incredible report from you and Kafka, where we have been citing that information when I talk to colleagues about how the preventative services sector has been dealing with this. So thank you to you, thank you to Jen March, thank you to Caitlin, thank you to all of our friends. We are in a good spot, and I don't say that lightly, going into the Assembly One House budget. So I want to thank you for all your work getting to this point.
Thank you so much, Assemblymember Hevesy. Thank you for taking time to join us. We really appreciate your partnership and collaboration always. And now I'm so honored again to pass the mic to Mia Williams-Payne, who is a youth advocate and will continue speaking on youth opportunities. Thank you so much.
Hi, my name is Mia Williams-Payne. I'm an 18-year-old youth voter from the Bronx. And my sole purpose here today is to evoke urgency among elected officials to maximize their roles and responsibilities in New York State government to meet the needs of youth. When reviewing CCC's youth justice platform, I felt direct correlations between these issues and my life. They deeply resonated with my experiences in New York City system and the firsthand accounts of injustice that I've heard from my peers. I'm here to use this platform to consciously amplify the rights of the forgotten, those that have been swept under the rug and deprived of a future of a demoralizing and brutal system that would rather criminalize children than mentor and educate them. A system that sends them to school to prepare for a supposedly bright future, but within a society that labels them guilty based on color and socioeconomic status. This system sends a very clear message to communities of color that if it's not the cops killing us with guns, nothing will be done to prevent civilians killing other civilians with guns, because why prevent the work that the NYPD was always there to do? And this is the government that I know, a government that ignored the suicide epidemic running rampant amongst BIPOC youth, a government that allows youth employment to double in the last year, a system that neither offers or establishes a seat at the table for us, as if it isn't our right to be thoroughly involved in policies that directly impact us and our families. Governor Hochul, I urge you to communicate to every neglected New York City youth that you are listening, internalizing, and acting. I'm here to say to Governor Hochul and the state legislator, instead of criminalizing our children and youth, we need to increase investments and access to youth development programming, youth employment, and behavioral health care. We need an independent New York State Youth Justice Task Force that includes young people directly impacted by these issues. For too long, youth have been silenced and misrepresented, and the system has done nothing but create barriers that reiterate to Black and brown youth that their futures are intended to be lived out behind bars, and their mistakes, poor choices, or identity is to be labeled as criminal and not as innocent. Governor Kathy Hochul and every elected official in New York, you need to prioritize one thing in your everyday walk with social justice, and that is ensuring that the youth of New York City are being heard, righteously educated, and that our minds, our futures, and our lives are unbiasedly protected. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mia. You are such an incredible advocate, and we're so glad that you could share your story and your experience and your perspective during this conversation. So thank you. My name is Alice Bufkin. I'm the Associate Executive Director of Policy and Advocacy at CCC, and I'm going to speak to you all about some issues around behavioral health, as well as needs for our youngest children with developmental delays and disabilities. I think you've heard today about some of the challenges that are facing children in the state, challenges, many of which were present well before COVID, but they've been made even harder as a result of the pandemic for families. Issues like housing and economic insecurity, loss of loved ones, anxiety, disruption of education. These have all played such a serious role and a long-lasting toll on the mental health and well-being of children. During the pandemic, we've seen mental health needs rise, even as access to care has fallen. And that's resulted in more and more children ending up in hospitals and ERs seeking care. In fact, the American Academy of Pediatrics and other national organizations have declared a state of emergency for children's behavioral health. We're here because our state has not invested enough in children for decades. This year's executive budget takes some important steps towards addressing children's behavioral health needs, including by increasing rates for outpatient clinical care, strengthening the workforce with a 5.4% cost of living adjustment for human service workers, and investing in services like home-based crisis intervention and the CHIP program. We need our elected leaders to support these proposed investments, but also to go further by making sure that we have rates that reflect the cost of providing services, by investing more in our workforce so we have the capacity to serve children, and by expanding family peer supports and supporting services for very young children and their families. So we'd love you to take a moment to take action and submit a letter urging your elected leaders to prioritize children's behavioral health. And you can see that Take Action and others in the chat as you're watching. I also want to speak today about the Early Intervention Program, or EI. This critical program provides therapeutic supports for children aged birth to 3 with developmental delays and disabilities and their families. Early intervention can really change the developmental trajectory of children, but too many families have struggled to access services because they can't find a provider. And we know from the data that children from low-income communities of color are least likely to be evaluated and ultimately get services, and the most likely to receive delays in services. To increase access to care, we need to increase the number of providers by enhancing EI reimbursement rates, which are lower now than they were in the 90s. We're asking for an 11% increase to rates to match the recent increase to preschool special education. We also need to make sure these rates address the specific needs of communities that have been left behind or have struggled to access EI services, which is why we're asking for a cost study to look at rates and make sure they're truly addressing the needs. And finally, we're asking our state to collect the data we need to identify where we aren't adequately serving children. Our next speaker will speak about the value of EI. And as she's speaking, again, we urge you to take action with the links that are being shared. I'm so happy to turn it over to Angela Donadell, who is a parent advocate and community organizer with East Harlem Community Partnership, who's going to talk about her family's experience with early intervention. So Angela, I'll turn it to you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Angela Donadell, and I'm a community advocate, a resident of East Harlem El Barrio, and the mother of an autistic son. My son, Christopher, was born on December 13th and spent 12 days in the NICU, and we were not able to bring him home until Christmas. He was the best present that I had ever received. I imagined all during my pregnancy, what would be his greatness? Would he find a cure for cancer, become a technological genius? I believe the world would be his for the asking. When we received the results of his evaluation, the hopes and dreams that I once had vanished. My mind wandered. I loved my son, and I knew that we would be creating new goals and new dreams. We would walk this path step by step together. He is a 28-year-old, an artist, a writer, and a college graduate. My favorite thing about my son is his ability to show kindness to others. I engaged my son all the time. I read, I sang, and talked to him. He was just not responding. Actually, he was always a quiet baby, and I just thought that I was lucky, that he was a child that was just calm all the time. I spoke to his pediatrician about my concerns, and he suggested we do an evaluation. He was diagnosed with autism, which at the time I didn't understand the significance of, and I feel he was misdiagnosed based upon the standards that were taking place at that time. He should have been diagnosed with Asperger's, but I digress. Because he was 18 months old when we got services for him, and that is considered relatively early, especially when you're dealing in Black and Brown communities, okay? Because of his age, he was eligible for early intervention services. And for the most part, he received these services in our home. As my son received services, I learned how to work with him at home to reinforce what he was learning in therapy. And with the utilization of electronic learning tools, by the time my son was 2.5, he could read proficiently, okay? EI had lifted the veil that was holding my son back at this point in his development and allowed him to grow into becoming his best self. I could not measure the impact these services would have on my son. Early intervention was the foundation on which my son's academic achievements stand. I believe the services received opened a window in his mind that was the beginning of many of his accomplishments. Graduating from high school, which I was told would probably never happen. Attending community college and receiving his associate's degree, and eventually receiving his bachelor's degree from Hunter College. I'm a very proud mother. However, in my role as an advocate for other parents, I see how hard it is for many parents, especially of Black and Brown children, to access services. I had to fight for my child to get the services he needed. To do so, I had to work in a different way in order to spend the time needed to ensure that my son had everything he needed and to fight to make sure he wasn't being underestimated, marginalized, or getting less than the best education that he, as well as all children, deserve. Most parents don't have the time to focus completely on what is needed for a child with alternate abilities, as I like to say. And I feel it's my role to support and guide those parents dealing with similar situations. This system needs to work better for families. We need to look at the racial disparities of who gets diagnosed with what and who receives services and who didn't. And I point this out because had my son been diagnosed with Asperger's, he would have had access to some of the very best schools for children on the spectrum to propel him forward. And I still have issue with that. And so I fight. We need to pay the providers of these services better rates. The services they provided to me and my child, even when he was young, were the foundation of everything for us. We cannot afford to sell our children short. This is why I advocate for children and families, because there are so many who do not receive the necessary tools to be their best selves due to funding shortages and lack of access. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Angela. That was a very beautiful testimony, and it is clear that you are not only a strong advocate for your community, but you're a strong advocate as a mother. Thank you so much for sharing that. I forgot to introduce myself earlier. My name is Rebecca Charles, and I am CCC's Policy and Advocacy Associate, focusing on housing, income supports, and education. I want to talk to you today about childcare and the state child tax credit. The pandemic has left New York State in the midst of a total economic crisis. The state's unemployment rate is about 1.5 times that of the US, and New York City's is double that of the US. US Census data shows that households with children suffered the most from loss of employment income and are currently suffering the most when it comes to recovering economically. We are calling on the state this year to make bold investments in this year's budget in childcare and expanding tax credits in order to serve the hardworking families of New York. Childcare is the largest monthly bill for New York families, and the childcare workforce is among the lowest paid in the New York economy. Women are citing childcare as their primary reason for being out of work, and only 7% of families in New York City with children under 5 are able to afford center-based care. There is also a crisis among childcare workers who are severely underpaid and leaving the profession altogether for jobs that can provide them living wages to support them and their families. A $5 billion investment from the state would carve out a path to universal childcare in New York by immediately expanding the childcare subsidy eligibility to 300% of the federal poverty line, investing $600 million to increase childcare services reimbursement rates, and investing $500 million to significantly raise compensation for the childcare workforce. Now, someone might tell you that $5 billion seems like a big ask, but it's really just 2% of the state budget that we're asking to be allocated to childcare. The state must also address child poverty by enhancing and expanding the Empire State Child Credit. We all saw how drastically the enhanced federal child credit cut child poverty. Now that those monthly payments have unfortunately expired, it is more crucial now than ever for the state to invest money into its state child credit. An expanded and enhanced child credit would look like all children under 18 receiving the credit, and all families, regardless of income or immigration status, receiving $1,000 for their child under 4 and $500 for children 4 and older. The current credit excludes children under 4, who are the most likely to live in poverty, and it also excludes children who are 17. Furthermore, the credit excludes the poorest of families and provides the maximum credit to the highest earning families who are eligible. This is unacceptable, considering the dire economic state we find ourselves in. It is past time for the state to make bold investments in childcare and to reform the state child credit. I invite you to take action on these issues on our website where you're following the live stream. And it is my pleasure to now introduce Wichita Mcconnell, who's a parent and provider from Cooper Kids Therapy Associates, an early intervention program, to discuss her passion for these issues.
Good morning. My name is Wichita Mcconnell, a resident of Queens, New York. I work in the New York City Early Intervention Program, coordinating services for families of children ages birth to 3 who have developmental delays like Angela's. I'm here today to talk about the importance of supporting families with the youngest children by providing universal childcare and expanding the Empire State Child Tax Credit to children under 4. The issue impacts me personally as a mother of 2. Even for a middle-class family like mine, childcare is cost prohibitive as we live paycheck to paycheck with no village to help raise the children. With my first, I stayed at home for a few years to eliminate the childcare costs altogether, taking tolls on both my mental health and career goals. Then with my second, it was either work full-time to exhaustion just to fund daycare and after school, or work part-time to reduce expenses, but to be physically and mentally available for my children. Again, I chose to cut the immediate cost. Luckily, because of that decision, I could continue to be the security and stability that my children need during the formative years, especially during the pandemic. However, the near-term savings has been at great expense to our long-term planning, including college. So much for the American dream. And both my husband and I have stable white-collar professional careers. This makes me fully aware how lucky I am to have these privileged options, not affordable to the predominantly low-income families I work with in early intervention program. Childcare, they just want their kids to eat. I'm paralyzed whenever these families reach out for help to apply for childcare assistance because they're overwhelmed. The available options on paper seem impressive until you actually want to use them. The system is not set up for easy access. On a regular basis, we help these families apply for a respite service, fill out ACS voucher. We seek out subsidized neighborhood daycare, scarce due to worker shortages. It's a vicious cycle. These workers too have to make the same difficult choice to not work a low-wage job in order to care for their own children. We're lucky to find someone who would, answer the calls or willing to walk the families through the paperwork. The application is thoroughly confusing, even with assistance from a trained professional like myself. The approval takes a long time, if we ever hear back at all. It really hurts to see families, most of whom Medicaid recipients, Black and brown, have to go through hoops to get help. Every day without care means no income, no money for rent, on the verge of being homeless. One mother begged for us to help as she had no money to buy food for her children. It's almost as though the system is designed for us to fail. The first 3 years of the child's life are critical to their global development and well-being. These are vulnerable years for all families, especially those with special needs. The children can only do well if their parents are okay. We are not okay. When we hear policymakers tell us they understand, we wonder, do they really? Have they ever lacked the means to meet the basic ends? Have they sat frustrated in jobs like mine? By the system set up for young families to aimlessly fend for themselves, never getting ahead? Even developing countries have policies that care for their youth and infrastructure based on the belief that it takes a village. How can we boast our wealth as a leading nation when our youngest are blatantly omitted from a spreadsheet? What are we missing here? I am urging the governor and state legislature to approve the $5 billion comprehensive investment in the budget to carve out a path to universal childcare for our youngest. It's time to take care of our caretakers so they can continue to care for others. Build a village, not another void. Not after this pandemic, so all families can have access to the resources they need to recover from the pandemic and thrive. Thank you for the time.
Thank you, Wichuda. I just want to close out by thanking the nearly 100 people that have joined us this morning to hear from our panelists. A shout out to Linda Rosenthal, Assemblymember Linda Rosenthal, Andrew Hevesy, and our fearless advocates today, Rebecca, Khadijah, Caitlin, Mia, Alice, Angela, and Wichuda. I think what we've all heard today is that We're optimistic about our ability to work together to inform the state's 2023 budget. I would encourage all of you that have been watching today to go to CCC's website, cccnewyork.org, and take action on all of the asks we've identified for behavioral health care, for childcare, for youth opportunity, for education, for tax policy, for housing, and to share those links with your peers and colleagues and friends so that we can actually weigh in and be very vocal about the requests that we have to inform an equitable recovery for all children, families, and communities. Thank you so much for joining us today. And again, a shout out to our panelists. You've inspired and touched me in ways that I hadn't expected this morning. So thank you to all of you. And we look forward to working together.